Hello there, this is Daniele from Toolchefs and welcome to this new video. So what we're going to do today is we're going to add some cloth simulation to our crowds. In Atoms what we do is in Maya we use NCloth, while in Houdini you can use Vellum. We don't display any cloth on live simulation, but what you can do is basically you can create a cloth cache out of a cache, depending on how you've set up your variations. And then you can use that cloth cache on our proxy node and then also render it with any supported render engine. So basically in Maya here I have this my variation scene. I've already created an NCloth setup for my man. I've just created a simple cape, nothing too complicated. So this is basically my NCloth mesh, and I have created a constraint between these vertices of the cape with the shirt. I've also created two passive colliders that are my shirt and my trousers, and basically now this scene is ready to be exported. So as we said, we support NCloth in Maya, but if you are going to create the variation in Maya and then you want to make the cloth sim in Houdini with Vellum, you need to tag the meshes that are gonna be simmed as cloth with this the tag setup tool, and click on the cloth mesh button and click on tag. This is because if you use NCloth, Atoms, when you export the variations, it will tag as cloth the meshes that are NCloth meshes. But if you are doing that in Houdini, you need to tag them as cloth, and then later in Houdini you will be able to use them as cloth meshes. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go through the workflow in Maya. Another thing that you can do with the tag setup tool is you can also use the cloth hide mesh, and this is basically used for the meshes that are going to be used as passive colliders, but they are not really going to be useful for rendering and things like that. So what basically, if you have any mesh like that, you need to tag it with this button here. Okay, so what I've done in this scene here is I've created this NCloth setup, as I've already said, and then what I've done is also I've created some render layers. So I have a variation no cloth render layer with all the meshes without the cape, and then another render layer with all the skin meshes and the cape mesh. So at this point what you can do is you can export your variations. So I'm going to export the variations with the variation builder. So I'm going to use the agent type, which is man in my case. I'm going to export the variations, select a variation skeleton file, select the root, and then also I'm going to export I'm going to bake the textures and also use the simple material conversion, because in my scene I have just Blins and Lambert, so I don't have any Arnold material. So I'm going to click run, and it's going to export our variations, and the NCloth setup is basically being exported as part of this variation builder process in a separate file, and this file is here. So basically this was the variation folder where we exported our variations. Under cloth man you'll find this cloth setup file, and this will contain basically all the settings for NCloth and also the constraints and so on. Okay, so this we're done with the variation stuff. Now what we need to do is we need to create a cache. So for that I'm going to create an agent group very quickly with a grid layout and a state machine. The grid layout, I'm just gonna make 5 agents, and the state machine I'm gonna set it to the state to 1, so they're gonna be walking. And finally what we're gonna do is we're going to add some the variations that were just exported in this scene, and I'm gonna randomize them with the variation randomizer tool. And if I switch now to variation mode, we have our agents, and you're seeing already that here we don't see any cape, and this is because again we don't display the cloth simulation on the live simulation, but we just do that on the proxy node. So once you have your simulation ready, you can just export a cache. In my case I'm going to export it here, and I'm going to export just 50 frames. and it's done. So okay, so at this stage what you can do is you can use the CFX Simulation Exporter. This tool is used both for cloth and fur. In our case, we just want to export the cloth. And as you can see up here, you have some like this action field where you can say, I want just to build my scene, I want just to export my scene, or I want to build my scene and export at the same time. So these two, build scene and export, are useful whenever you want to build your scene, then tweak the simulation in some way, maybe tweak some parameter on the NCloth meshes, or the passive colliders, or even on nucleus if you want. And then you can export that at a later stage. Otherwise, you can just build a scene and export. So it's basically gonna do everything in one go. In our case, we're just gonna build the scene and export. So what we're going to do now is we're gonna provide a, we're gonna provide a path to our cloth cache. I've already exported a cloth cache here previously, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna select the same file. So that's fine. And then here what we're gonna do is we're gonna provide the cache that we just exported and the variation file. And this is also the variation file that we have just exported. Okay, so here also you have some other options. For instance, you can provide a filter for agent ID. So if you just want to simulate some agents, export the cloth cache for some agents, you can do that. Also, you can export the cloth cache only for some variations if you want. Another thing that you can do is also you can batch this process. Batching means that, for instance, if you have 200 agents in your cache, NCloth is quite slow when running simulations for a lot of agents. So you want to make sure that you split the simulation in different batches. So what this means is that if you have 10 batches, and if you have a cache of 200 agents, you're gonna have 10 batches of 20 agents. And that will be much faster. So even if you're running it on the farm, it's a good practice if you have a large cache with many agents, and also if the NCloth setup is quite heavy, just to split this process in batches. In my case, it's gonna be pretty light, so I won't just care. I will just do it in this way. When you click run, it's gonna ask if you want to clear your scene. So make sure that maybe you saved your scene before pressing yes. In my case, I don't particularly care, so I'm just gonna press yes. And the process that is running is Atoms is building. So it's already completed actually, so I can show you here. If I rewind, so Atoms has built in this scene all the agents that have the NCloth setup. So you see here we have the capes for some agents, and also their passive colliders. So for instance, in this case, I had all the shirts and the trousers were all passive colliders, so that's why Atoms has built the all these agents. But otherwise, if Atom doesn't find any passive collider or NCloth, it won't actually build that agent, because it wouldn't be useful for the simulation. So if I press play now, we see the agents are actually simulating, and Atoms has already exported the cloth cache for us. During the pre-roll, you might see some agents being at different levels. So for instance, you see that guy there, but it's because some pre-roll has been applied. So if, for instance, if I go at frame 0, they should be actually, what you care is really about the first frame of the cache, which I think probably was frame 1, and all the agents here are the same level. So it's just a pre-roll applied the offset, so that basically at the first frame we actually have a nice and smoothed cloth sim. So it started 20 frames earlier, and then we reach at this point where actually the cloth has been already simmed. So okay, so now we have our cloth cache. If we check our folder, we'll see it here. So we have already all the cloth cache in here, and the cloth cache is contains just a set of all the information about normals and points for the cloth meshes. So it's not very heavy. It's quite small. The file size of these cloth caches. Okay, so now what I can do is I can create our Atoms proxy. I'm gonna provide the cloth cache, the cache path first. So that one, the variation file, which is that one. And then if I switch to variation, You see here we have the variations, but we are not seeing still the capes, and this is because we have to provide the cloth cache. So if I go in here, now we see our capes. So if I now drag and scrub the timeline, I see that basically those meshes have a live, you know, not alive, but they have a cloth simulation applied. Okay, so that's cool. And if I go, for instance, at this frame and I just create an Arnold light very quickly, I can even create a plane just to make things a bit nicer. This with that. If I render with Arnold, you see here basically what we have is we have both the capes and you know, the standard variation meshes. If you plan to export and you know the cloth cache from Houdini using Vellum, you can still do that and come back to Maya to render. So it's not really a problem, because what you're gonna do in Houdini, you're gonna still export a cloth cache that then can be read back into Maya with the Atoms proxy. Okay, and this is all for this video. Thanks for watching.